recently here in the studio, I was doing one of my favorite pastimes, which is trying to recreate a song that had a big influence on me, probably earlier in my life, and there's some nostalgic element to that. But what I'll do, if I get some time in between work, I will try and essentially recreate a production of a song I love from scratch, as close to the original as possible, as true to the original production, essentially as a case study. Because I, as an engineer, producer, musician, I'm always trying to learn more. I want to learn how did they, what is it about this record? What makes this sound, right? So I went pretty deep down the rabbit hole on Paramore, and the Paramore sound that really hit and resonated with me was from the first couple of records. I freaking loved it. I love the guitar sound, the rock and drum sound, all of it. So I got to work on starting to try and figure out how to recreate this thing and what went into the production to actually get these sounds. Now, to preface all of this, I'm going to state the obvious, and if you don't know this, let this be a lesson. The sound, when you hear record, so much of what makes it what it is the song. It's the writing. It's the material. Like, that is so much of it. The next level, next tier, is the production. Now, the production is kind of all encompassing, and depending on the record you're talking about, it could be the lack of what's there, or it can be all sorts of stuff that's there that you don't necessarily notice. So I love recreating these tracks as a case study so that I can discover some of those things and sharpen my tools, if you will, that I use when I'm making records or going for a similar sound for another artist that I'm working with. So in this video, I'm going to show you some of the things that I discovered and that I did to get to the current version that I'm at on this song, which I think sounds freaking awesome. There are currently no vocals on this version yet. I am hoping to get some vocals cut for it next weekend, going to New York. So we'll see how that goes, and I'll follow up once we get vocals on it. But today in this video, I'm going to be talking about all of the music that goes in the production and how I got the sounds that I did and what I learned. All right, so first things first, this song, I played all of the instruments, so that's gonna be very different than the original, right? What's gonna make the difference between the original version and this version? Obviously, different musicians. Now, the others is like trying to understand both some of the engineering techniques that were used, maybe how things were mic'd, this and that. I have no idea. It's freaking hard to find anything on the engineering of this particular record, the Brand New Eyes era of Paramore. I think Decode was a bonus track on Brand New Eyes. It was also part of a soundtrack for the Twilight movie. But I know Rob Cavallo produced it, and they probably used his engineer, Doug McKean. So as far as the recording goes, I'm kind of just listening to the original and making my best guess at what is going to accomplish that sound. So we'll go through that. The next thing, outside of the engineering, which the engineering is much less important, sadly, as an engineer, it's the actual chain, right? It's the input, it's the source, it's the guitar, it's the amp, it's the pedal chain, the effects, and then of course the part. Now, the part is pretty freaking simple. This is a fairly straightforward and simple song. There's a melody that plays in the intro. It sort of evolves as the song continues and tone changes a little bit on that melody. There's some changes in the melody depending on the section of the song. And then there's the rhythm guitars, the progression of the song, right? Which is also pretty repetitive throughout the whole song. So once I got the progression and the melody down, that was pretty much it. Then what I'm doing is listening for the little changes, how things change, when they change, how they are, when does the tone change, all of that. So that was really interesting to discover and, you know, do my version, then go back to the original and listen and go, oh, looks like the melody actually switched pickups here and maybe kicked on a higher level of overdrive on this. Now, speaking of guitar and overdrive, I had the luxury of being introduced to Josh Farro. Josh Farro is one of the original members of Paramore who wrote all of these early songs as well as played on these records and toured. So Josh and I were on the phone, and of course I was bothering him with all these questions about, you know, what he was using. The guitar, he had a custom telly that he used pretty much exclusively on everything. There were some overdubs where he used different guitars, but he was pretty much using a Marshall amp for both in the studio and on the road. Now, first thing I'll tell you, I'm not a guitar amp guru. I have smarter people that I call and ask questions about this. And what I've learned is there's kind of like three staples in the Marshall world. We got the JTM 45, you got the JCM 800, and you got the Plexi. Those three kind of cover all the ground on the Marshall sound, right? Now I wanted to get the closest I could to this, so I consulted with some of my smarter guitar friends. I talked to Tyler Bryant, I talked to Brett Pop, I talked to Josh Farrell himself. I also talked to an amp tech here in town, Jeff Heim, and all of them advised me that I should go with a Marshall, and that Marshall has these Studio Series amps, which are essentially more affordable versions of their legacy amps. They're like lower wattage, they're smaller form factor, and they're just cheaper. So my friends at Sweetwater sent me over the JCM 800 Lead Series edition of the studio amp of the Marshall. And I used that amp for all of the guitars on this song, for the melody and for the heavier rhythm guitars on the song, all the layers. So let's go ahead and check out these guitars. So for the melody guitar, I used this. This is a Fender Telecaster American Vintage version. The melody, I used the neck pickup, which sounded absolutely awesome. I was going into the low input of the JCM 800 Studio Edition with as clean of a sound as I could get going into the low input. And then I used a delay and a reverb from a Strymon pedal on the pedal board. And there may have even been a slight subtle chorusing on that part. And then there's an additional round of delay and reverb that I did in Pro Tools. Now, as far as how I recorded this, I used two microphones on the cabinet. Technically, I used two different cabinets or two different speakers on the electric guitar because I wanted to have some differences in tonal quality, and the speaker on the cabinet makes a big difference. So on the melody part of the guitar, I used two microphones. I used a 121 pretty freaking close to the speaker. I don't normally like the microphone's that close, but just based off of how the original sounded pretty close. And the second mic that I use is a room mic. Now, I don't know if they use room mics, but I always put up a room mic with the electric guitar. So here's both mics played together. Now what you'll hear is I actually have a second layer of delay and reverb, which I mentioned before. If I bypass those, this is just the two mics without the extra layer. Okay, so that's just the mics. Let's solo the close mic. You can hear it's pretty loud. There's a little bit of like break in there, but it's still pretty clean. And then here is the room mic soloed. Sounds really nice and really clean. I believe I used a Soyuz FET condenser as the room mic. Close mic is a 121. Again, here's them both together. And then the first thing I did is I sent that track to a delay, which is the Soundtoys Echo Boy. I'm compressing it coming out of that, and then that's actually going straight into a reverb, which is just a deverb plugin. Looks like a Hall medium and probably a high pass filter. Yeah, so this is the melody guitar going into some delay plus reverb. The other cool thing about the production of how this melody part goes is as the song progresses and changes parts, the pickups change and there's a slight overdrive added to it to just really pick up the tension on that part. So that tone changes a little bit. I would say I use the same track to do later in the song is the, let's call it a solo in the bridge, so coming out of the chorus. Now this tone is a little bit different than the original. I added a micro shift pitch delay on it, and it's automated. So if I pull up the plugin here and I hit play, you're gonna see this mix knob sort of move around. And what's cool about that is it essentially just widens that guitar lead part because the rhythm guitars are going pretty heavy. So let's check out the rhythm guitars next. Now for the rhythm guitars, I used two guitars. I used this Telecaster on the bridge pickup with a little bit of the tone knob rolled off. And for the second rhythm guitar, I used this Epiphone 355 on the bridge pickup, which for whatever reason is reversed on my guitar. Volume up, tone all the way up. This thing through the JCM 800 ruled. Now for the rhythm guitars, I went to the JCM 800 on the high input, and I had that preamp cranked literally all the way up, straight into the amp using the amp's overdrive. Only other thing I did on the rhythm guitars was I think I kicked on the Noble's ODR1 overdrive just a little bit, just to give it a little more distortion on the choruses. Okay, so the guitar on the right is the Telecaster. And then the guitar left is the Epiphone 355. Now, if I had to guess, the way they did it in the studio, it wasn't an obviously wasn't an Epiphone 355. It was probably a Gibson Les Paul, if I had to guess. I have a Gibson Les Paul. I just plugged this one in and loved how it sounded. So now if we listen to all three guitars together. All of those are just hitting the JCM 800. One of the guitars was on the greenback speaker, the other one was on a vintage 30 speaker. Same close mic, same room mic on both, and very loud. All the guitars are very loud. Let's listen to the guitars now in context coming in the chorus. Again, for the microphones, I'm using the close mic and the room mic. The reason is there is a depth that you get when you put the space that the amp is in. It sounds more natural, and it actually fills up the mix a lot more. Not always necessary, but it's always nice to have it, especially when you get into the mix, because it does some of that separation work for you right off the jump. Then the other component is both of these guitars are going to a bus, which has an EQ on out. This is with nothing on the bus. Sounds freaking great. There's a little bit of an EQ. And then I added this Abbey Road tape emulation to just kind of push it a little bit harder. Sounds freaking great. Now I will say this isn't necessarily mixed, but I do try to sort of mix as I go, and these are some decisions I made. This is all in the box, all plugins. There's no outboard hardware, no summing, none of that. All in the box, just out left and right. So these are the plugins that I've picked for where it is currently. I almost forgot about the bridge guitar part. Let's look at this. There are these clean little diamond parts here. I'm gonna call them diamonds, that are almost pretty harsh sounding. Listen to this. This is on the breakdown section. Those clean guitars, I believe, are both Telecasters hitting the Marshall. The guitars fill up this mid-range space. Almost exclusively mid-range, and then if we add the bass in, you can hear it really fills out that low-mid spectrum. And then lastly, the drums. For the bass, I used a Fender Jazz bass, and it has nickel strings on it, and it just has like that cool bite and grit to it. So here's what that sounded like. It was a little clean direct, so I added this Ampeg plugin on it, this SVT, and then on the bus I have a EQ that's cutting out some mud, adding a little bit of mid-range in there at 1700, and then a distressor that's actually pretty aggressive on it. The only other thing I added was a reamp of a combo, and it's very low, but it's just to basically sound like a bad blown out amp. And as you can tell, it's all mid-range, but when you add both of those together, and of course when you mix it all together. Now for drums, I did pretty much my basic mic setup that I normally do. I didn't change too much. I'll just show you the tracks we got here. We've got kick in, kick out, going to a kick bus, snare top, snare bottom, going to a snare bus. We've got one mic, rack tom, floor tom, stereo overheads, hi-hat ride mic, and then a room mic. That's it. All the drum mics are going to a stereo drum bus, which has some stuff on it. Again, this is all in the box, so I'm just using a few plugins here. We've got little EQ, another little EQ for boosting. This is like an SSL 4000E. Then we have this Slate Digital Gray, which is like a VCA compressor, SSL style. I freaking love this thing on drum bus. It's honestly awesome. If I'm using in the box plugins, it's one of my faves. I said faves. Slate Digital Virtual Tape Machine after that, and then a limiter to really just like make it cut through. So outside of that, there's some reverb that the whole drum bus is sending to. And then of course we have a kick sample and snare sample. And one of the things I always want to know is how much are those samples playing a role? So here's the drums with no samples. Now, this is tricky because Zach Farrow actually is pretty aggressive with his performance, and it's really hard to not choke out the tone out of drums when you're hitting them really hard. So I had to have that emotion, the aggression on the performance without choking things out too much. And the parts aren't crazy on this song, but you know, if you want to have that same impact that Zach had on it, it's like you got to do a good job. So here's how it sounded. This is with no samples, and then I'll add the samples in so you can hear, and I'll show you what samples we're using. And that reverb's actually playing a pretty big role. Let me mute the reverb too. In case you're wondering, this studio I'm in is a house studio. So this drum room is literally a bedroom drum booth. So it's just a bedroom. That's what it sounds like. If we add in that reverb, huge contribution. This is the Lexicon UAD Lexicon 480L. timeless. I mean, this is a famous reverb for a reason. Pretty much every mixer is using this. It sounds incredible. This is a room, large room. I don't think I messed with it, but these are the settings. And then after that, we just have our kick and snare sample. So again, let's do it before and after. Now let's add them in. Not a big change, subtle. These are basically just being used to really fight their way through the guitars and the bass. I'll do an A-B again without the drums and solo. Here's without the samples. And I know some guys that mix stuff like this will go totally crazy with the samples. I'm just supplementing kick drum and snare drum, okay? Because I recorded the drums and played the drums and captured them how I wanted them to sound. So they sound good, the recording is good, which is such a massive part of getting a great mix that translates how you want, especially with the rock music like this, where there's a lot of compression, a lot of loud everything that everything's just fighting for its way through the mix. For anyone who's curious, the samples here, these are actually CLA samples, which of course I reached for. Chris mixed, I'm pretty sure mixed this song. He mixes a lot of the Paramore singles. I think the mixers on Brand New Eyes were Chris Lord-Alge, Doug McKean, and one other guy, shout out to you, I don't remember your name. So this is just a CLA drum sample pack. I want to say it was a part of a Slate purchase. Could be wrong. Got a long time ago. This is the kick is the DW22. It's literally just a preset where I just tweaked the balance a little bit. And then the snare is probably another CLA snare pearl steel. Let me see, snare pearl steel. Yep, this is a CLA snare pearl steel. I guess it's not a preset, but it's just, you know, all of the samples in here, and I just tweaked it to get what I needed out of it. You know, you're using the parts that you need to supplement to, again, make the point in the mix. So that's it. Again, this is sort of the pre-mix, so we'll see how things end up. If you want to see when the song is totally done with vocals and you want to see a full mix breakdown, it's probably not going to be super different than this, but I likely will at least route it through a summing mixer and maybe A-B some outboard gear versus some in-the-box stuff and see where it winds up. But who knows, it could be better in the box. I mean, it's always, you just got to see. Something worth mentioning are the actual drums that I used on this song. I used a classic maple Ludwig, I believe it's the Fab 3, and the kick is a 22x14 kick, toms 13, 16-inch toms, and the snare is a Ludwig Black Beauty that was custom from CNC. I've actually been using it for like 16, 17 years now. I've had it for a very long, it's a 6.5x14 Black Beauty. Cranked up sort of medium high tuning on this so that it can cut through, but it still has some body to it, as you can tell. As far as how we mic'd it, again, we already went through the tracks, but I'll just tell you the names of the mics if you're interested. The kick, I did 2 kick in, kick out. The kick in is a vintage D12E. The kick out is a Warm Audio FET 47. The snare, on the snare top and bottom, I did snare top, the Lauten Audio snare mic. The snare bottom is a Lauten Audio LS120 or LA120. It's a pencil condenser mic, which actually wound up being pretty important for the snare sound. The snare bottom is actually a pretty critical part of the snare sound on this track. I usually could take or leave a snare bottom mic. Toms were 414 EB copies from Warm Audio. I believe they're WA14s, stereo pair. They were mounted to the toms with the Lauten Audio little boom things, which are freaking amazing for saving space in the drum room. On the overheads, I used the Warm Audio CX12s in sort of a ORTF stereo configuration. And then the room mic I used was a Coles 4038 ribbon mic, which is fantastic. I got it from Turnlab. If you haven't seen, you can still get new Coles 4038s. I did use mics on the hi-hat and ride. As a note, what I do is I cut out those mics when I'm not playing those cymbals so that they're only there to accent when they're being used, and all of their sort of mic bleed is being edited out of the take. But the hi-hat and ride mics are the Soyuz 013 tube mics, which, yes, is absolutely absurd, but they sound freaking great. A note on mic position: all the close mic positions are nothing special, nothing super unique. The kick mics, I will say, were both technically, I said kick in and kick out, they're both technically outside of the kick drum, and they were capsule aligned, so right next to each other. The D12 was in front of the hole on the front of the kick drum, there was a hole, and then the FET 47 was right next to the D12, but it's in front of the actual closed part of the head, and both of those again are outside of the kick, probably, I don't know, 5-6 inches off of the actual kick drum itself. And the Coles that I used on the room mic was in a separate room with the door left open slightly, both doors between both rooms left slightly open, so that it's getting no direct transients from that drum kit. Combination of the drum kit with the mics and the mic placement. Also, the room was pretty treated. I had some panels, some big gobos around the drum kit. The room is filled with acoustic panels, so it's pretty controlled in that room, as you heard when I muted the Lexicon reverb. And then the only other thing worth noting is on the kick drum, I actually built a kick tunnel, which is pretty common in rock drums, is to isolate those kick mics a bit, because sometimes you don't want them to be right on the kick drum. Maybe you want them to be off a little bit, but then they can start picking up all the crashes. So I built a kick tunnel with just a couple snare stands and moving blankets just hanging over it. It wasn't perfect, but it helped. It really helped isolate those drums. If you're interested in any of the stuff that I used on this, I have links to all of them down in the description. That'll take you to Sweetwater affiliate link, but you can check that all out in the link below. Let you know how the vocals go. I'm heading to New York this coming weekend, and I'm hoping to meet up with a singer who I think, if we have time, we'll be able to cut some vocals on this, and maybe we'll revisit this if anyone has any interest in seeing how it turns out. And I don't know, I've got a bunch of these covers. These are all just for the love of the game. They're sort of like a case study of trying different productions, different genres, different singers, sounds, all of that. I have a lot of fun, and you know, I figure, hey, if I'm doing it here in the studio and I'm putting this much time into it, why not share it with you? I hope you guys like watching this. So let me know if you made it this far in the video. I would be so stunned, because this is like, you are really committed. You know, this is all stuff that I wanted to know, that I want to know about, you know, how the original records were made. I wish there was more documentation of this. Generally, when you're on the sessions, there's just not a lot of time to document stuff when you're working. So, you know, I hope you enjoyed this. Big shout out to Sweetwater and sending me the Marshall so that I can really try. I tried it in so many different ways, and it was so fun. It's the Studio Series edition. If you want, go pick one up for the studio if you can. Again, 3 different versions. We got the JTM 45. That's actually up top here. I borrowed it from my friend Brett. That one sounds great too. It's not as heavy as the JTM 800 or the Plexi version of it. That's the third one. I want to get the Plexi too. I want to just have a bunch of Marshalls here in the studio. Now, seriously, truly, I love rock and roll, and the tones just like, oh, you hear it, and you're like, yeah, that's that sound that I love and is familiar. So thank you guys for watching. Leave a comment down below, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Are you subscribed yet? Studio Time? This channel is what, a year, almost 2 years old, a year and a half or so, give or take. I would love for you to subscribe so you can see these videos. This is truly for people who just really want to dive deep. So again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next one.